In a shoebox, among the junk in a dead man's car, I found something I wasn't looking for. I found a child's drawing, a little house, a son, and the word Daddy. I thought it was a clue to my own story, but when I handed it to her and her fingers started to tremble, I realized I had found the key to someone else's hell, and I had just accidentally opened the door. Nia's hands moved on their own. Wipe the table, gather the dirty dishes, refill the trucker's coffee in the corner without waiting for him to ask. Her body had learned this dance long ago, turning every movement into a reflex that required no conscious thought. Her gaze slid past the faces. She didn't see people, only functions. This one ordered a burger. That one paid in cash. That woman left a lousy tip. The Crossroads diner hummed with a monotonous drone. The rumble of semis on the highway merged with the murmur of the radio on the counter, the clatter of dishes, and muffled conversations. Mia existed inside this noise, like a fish in murky water. It was her habitat, her shield against the need to think. She scraped some loose change from the table by the window, dropping the quarters into her apron pocket where they chimed softly against the others. She wiped a sticky spot left by a spilled soda. Her movements were precise, economical. No wasted energy, no emotion. It was a mechanical ballet, a series of practiced motions she could perform in her sleep. She was a ghost in her own life, a silent observer of the endless, transient flow of strangers who stopped for a meal and then disappeared back onto the highway, leaving behind only dirty plates and a few dollars on the table. "Mia, table 6 needs their check," Helen shouted from the kitchen. Mia nodded, though Helen couldn't see her. She walked to the register, printed the check, delivered it, took the payment, returned to the counter. The man arrived without a sound. Mia didn't hear the door's bell, didn't see him cross the room. He just materialized at the table by the window, the very one she had just wiped down. When she approached, he didn't raise his head. He sat motionless, staring out the window at the endless ribbon of the highway. He smelled of the road, dust, tobacco, and something stale and weary. "What can I get for you?" Mia asked, her voice quiet, almost inaudible. "Coffee, please. Black." His voice was hoarse, low. He didn't look at her. She jotted the order in her notepad, though she would have remembered it anyway. She turned and walked to the counter, poured coffee from a fresh pot, brought it to him. She placed the cup before the man. He gave a barely perceptible nod. Mia walked away. Just another customer, another function. Nothing special. An hour passed. Mia wiped tables, refilled napkin dispensers, and swapped dirty ashtrays for clean ones. The man sat motionless. His cup was empty. He wasn't looking at his phone or reading a paper, just staring out the window. As Mia passed by, he raised his hand. The gesture was faint, almost unnoticeable. "Another one, please." The second cup. Mia brought it, set it down, walked away. Helen, wiping down the bar, glanced at the table by the window. "This guy planning on moving in?" Mia remained silent and continued to work. An hour later, the man ordered a third cup. Mia brought it without a word. This time she lingered for a second longer. She looked at his hands resting on the table. They were old, calloused, with dirt ingrained under the nails. But the nails were neatly trimmed, almost like a child's. The strange detail snagged in her consciousness. She walked away as the diner began to empty out. The evening rush of truckers had subsided. Only the regulars remained. A local taxi driver, a couple of road workers, and an old woman who ordered tea and sat for hours every day. And the man by the window. When he raised his hand for the fourth time, Mia felt a prick of unease. Faint, almost imperceptible, like a splinter under the skin. 4 hours, 4 cups of coffee. It broke the rhythm. It deviated from the pattern. She poured the coffee more slowly than usual, placed the cup on a tray, and carried it to the table. The man looked up, for the first time all evening. His eyes were a watery gray, weary to their depths. He looked at her, but it was as if he were looking straight through her. Mia froze for a moment. She put the cup down and walked away, her heart beating just a little faster than normal. Mia was at the register, cashing out her shift, when she heard a trucker's voice. "Miss, I think your customer isn't doing so well." She spun around. The man had slumped sideways. His head was on the table, one arm hanging limply. The cup of coffee stood untouched, steam rising from it into the dead silence. There was no drama, no screams. He had simply stopped. Helen lunged for the phone. Mia walked toward the table, stopping a step away. She stared at the motionless figure. The air hung heavy with the smell of tobacco and coffee. The paramedics arrived quickly, 2 men in rumpled white uniforms. They checked for a pulse, exchanged a glance. One of them shook his head. "Massive heart attack." Sheriff Brody arrived next, a large man with tired brown eyes and a neat mustache. He took out his notebook and asked a few questions. Helen chattered, describing the events, her hands gesturing wildly. Her voice sounded loud in the now empty diner. Mia stood off to the side, answering in monosyllables when asked, her voice barely audible. "How long was he here?" 4 hours. "What did he order?" "Coffee, 4 cups. Brody jotted it down and closed his notebook with a sharp snap. "It happens. His age, the road." He said it more to the air than to the waitresses. Case closed. After the body was taken away and the diner was closed, Mia was left alone in the main room. Helen had left, the door slamming behind her. The lights were off, save for a single dim lamp above the counter that illuminated the space. Mia walked over to the table by the window. The cup was still there, untouched, cold. She stared at a greasy fingerprint on the porcelain, at the crumbs from a pastry, at the worn vinyl tablecloth she had wiped 100 times. The air still held his presence. Mia ran her hand over the tabletop, her fingers touching the cold surface. For the first time in a long time, she felt something other than emptiness. A sharp, unfamiliar curiosity, like a crack in a wall. Her orderly world had fractured, and into that fracture, a stranger's life, suddenly cut short, had peered in. The next morning, Mia walked her usual route to work, the pedestrian bridge over the highway humming under her feet as the wind whipped through her hair. She had almost convinced herself that yesterday was just a bad dream, a routine incident. People die, it happens. But when the diner's parking lot came into view, her hope crumbled. A cherry-red sedan sat at the edge of the empty lot, solitary, coated in morning dew. Mia stopped, staring at the car. It was tangible proof, a monument to yesterday, a reproach. As long as the car was here, the story wasn't over. She gripped the strap of her bag tighter and walked on. Sheriff Brody came in for lunch, right on schedule. Mia poured him a coffee and walked to his table, her hands trembling slightly. She set the cup down, then picked up the coffee pot as if to offer a refill. "Sheriff?" Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Brody looked up, not with interest, but simply registering her presence. "Did you find out anything about that man? Does he have a family? Who was he?" The words came out with difficulty, each one an effort. Mia had never stepped outside the bounds of her function, never showed initiative. Now she was vulnerable, visible. Brody slowly placed his fork on his plate. He looked at Mia with a long, appraising stare. "Miss," he said in a tone used to calm hysterical children. "I told you. It was an accident. We're following standard procedure. This doesn't concern you." The words hit her like a slap. Mia took a step back, nodded, turned, and walked toward the counter. Inside her, something hot and unfamiliar was churning. Humiliation. And determination. Night. The parking lot was empty. The orange glow of a streetlight cast long shadows. Mia stood before the cherry-red sedan, dressed in all black, dark jeans, an old windbreaker, the hood pulled over her face. In her hand was a thin metal ruler from the diner's kitchen. Cold, smooth. Her heart hammered in her throat. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. She, the invisible girl who always followed the rules, was about to commit a crime. This was the point of no return. Mia slid the ruler between the glass and the doorframe. Her hands shook. The ruler slipped. Again. And again. A soft click. The door gave way. She froze, looked around. The lot was deserted. She dove inside the car. It smelled of staleness, gasoline, loneliness. Mia switched on her phone's flashlight, the weak beam illuminating the interior. The glove compartment. She opened it. Inside were old gas station receipts, napkins. Nothing. Under the driver's seat. Dust, candy wrappers. The back seat was empty. No documents, no photographs, no leads. Mia felt a wave of despair wash over her. Shame burned inside her. She was a complete idiot. Breaking into a dead man's car in pursuit of a ghost. It was all for nothing. Mia was ready to get out and leave, to give up. In a surge of helpless anger, she kicked the rubber mat on the floor. It slid aside. In the dim light of her phone, an unnatural bulge was visible. Mia froze. She crouched down, pulled back the edge of the worn carpeting. There, in the recess for tools, it lay, a small piece of paper, folded into a square, yellowed with time. Mia picked it up with trembling fingers, unfolded it carefully, as if afraid it would crumble to dust. It was a child's drawing, a house with a crooked plume of smoke coming from the chimney, a bright sun with stick-figure rays, two figures holding hands, one large, one small. Below, in uneven letters, "Daddy." Mia stared at the drawing, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. This wasn't an answer, but it was a beginning, a real beginning. At night, her apartment transformed into a sanctuary. Mia sat on the edge of her bed, a shoebox beside her. It was old and worn, once home to a pair of fall boots. Now, it held something far more precious. She opened the lid and carefully lifted out the drawing with two fingers, as if afraid of damaging it. She unfolded it. The light from her desk lamp highlighted every line. The house with its crooked smoke, the sun with its stick-like rays, the two figures holding hands. Mia ran her fingers over the paper. It was fragile, yellowed, but it felt alive. She brought the drawing closer to her face, inhaling. She thought she could catch the faint scent of crayons, a child's scent, the scent of the past. She studied each clumsy figure with a sense of reverence. The large one had broad shoulders and stick-like arms. The small one had two triangles for pigtails and a round head. Below, the uneven letters spelled out, "Daddy." Mia ran her fingers over the paper. It was fragile and yellowed, but it felt alive. She brought the drawing closer, inhaling, as if she could catch the faint scent of crayons, a child's scent, the scent of the past. She studied each clumsy figure with a sense of reverence. The large one had broad shoulders and stick-like arms. The small one, 2 triangles for pigtails and a round head. Below, the uneven letters spelled out, Daddy. Mia stared at the word for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly. This drawing was her only connection to the mystery, the only tangible object in her empty apartment that was filled with meaning. She placed it back in the box, closed the lid, and slid it under her bed. But her thoughts remained outside, circling the small, folded piece of paper. Her work began to fall apart. She brought a trucker a glass of orange juice instead of tomato. He frowned, pointing at the glass in silence. She apologized quietly, took it away, and brought the right one. She forgot to add a coffee to a bill, and the cashier pointed out the mistake. Mia just nodded and corrected it. She would stand in the middle of the diner with a tray, frozen, staring into space. "Earth to Mia!" Helen snapped her fingers in front of her face. Mia flinched, blinking. "What? Table 4 has been waiting for 10 minutes. Are you even listening?" "Sorry, right now." Helen watched her for a long moment, her eyes narrowed, appraising. Mia turned away and headed for the kitchen. Old Pete, a regular, stopped her at the counter. "Tough week, kiddo?" His voice was sympathetic, kind. Mia tried to smile, but it came out weak. "I'm fine, just tired." Every such moment was a jab of fear, losing her job, losing her only constant, being left completely alone. The diner's back alley smelled of garbage and stale tobacco. Mia stood against the wall, breathing in the cold air. Smoke break. 15 minutes of silence. She pulled the drawing from her apron pocket, unfolding it partially to look at the familiar lines. "Mia, this isn't funny anymore." Helen's voice was as sharp as a whip crack. Mia quickly folded the drawing and hid it in her pocket. Helen stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her gaze hard. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Mia said nothing. Helen stepped closer. "I see you staring into space. I see you mixing up orders. I see you carrying that stupid piece of paper everywhere. Mia, wake up. The guy died. It happens. Get over it. It's not just a piece of paper." The words escaped her, quiet but firm. Helen scoffed. "Of course not. It's a clue. You're a detective now, right? Investigating the great mystery of the parking lot heart attack?" "You don't understand. I understand that you're losing your grip, and that's dangerous. For you, for me, for the job." Mia turned away, looking at the dumpsters. Helen didn't move. "This is a threat, Mia. A threat to our peace of mind. The manager has already asked what's wrong with you. How long do you think you'll last if you keep messing up?" For Helen, this wasn't just an oddity. It was a disruption of the balance, a dangerous whim that had to be stopped. Immediately. "Give me that stupid paper. I'll throw it away." Helen stepped forward, holding out her hand. Mia recoiled, pressing a hand to her pocket. "No." "Mia, don't be a fool. Give it to me." "No." Helen took another step, trying to grab Mia's wrist, and met a wall. Mia shoved her with all her might, with both hands, sharply. Helen stumbled, her eyes wide with shock. Mia stood panting, her eyes dark, her face tense. "Don't touch it." Helen regained her balance and stepped forward again. "Are you insane?" She lunged, trying to snatch the drawing. Mia fought back, a short, furious struggle filled with the smells of cigarette smoke, rotting garbage, and the metallic taste of fear. Helen pulled at her apron while Mia protected the pocket like a life raft. A shove. Helen flew backward, her back hitting the wall. Mia stood, breathing heavily, the drawing in her hand, crumpled but intact. Helen straightened up, looking at her with disbelief. "You're a psycho." The word landed like a sentence. Helen turned and went back inside, the door slamming shut. Mia was left alone. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. For the first time in her life, she had given in to anger. And it terrified her. The apartment greeted her with silence. Mia sat on the sofa, the drawing on the table in front of her. She stared at it, trying to find a justification, an explanation for her obsession. The car. The cherry red sedan. A memory surfaced. Her father, Daniel, polishing the hood of an identical car. The yard of their old house. A sunny day. He rarely smiled, but he was smiling then. It was his pride, his only treasure. A coincidence? Mia refused to believe it. This couldn't be a coincidence. It was a sign. The first brick in the wall of her new reality. Mia picked up the drawing again, unfolding it completely. She looked at it now with different eyes. The house with the triangular roof. Their summer cabin. She remembered it. The crooked apple tree beside it. The wooden porch. The old well. The two figures. The large one with broad shoulders. The small one with two pigtails. Mia remembered that day. A park. Her father reading the newspaper on a bench. She was drawing, sitting on the grass. He had praised her, smiled his rare, warm smile. He had said, "I'll keep this to remember." Her memory was constructing a coherent picture, ignoring inconsistencies, filling in the gaps. Mia believed it. The theory took shape. Her father hadn't just disappeared. He had come back. He had found her. He came to the diner, sat for hours, watching. But he couldn't bring himself to approach her. He saw what she had become, a faceless waitress, a ghost. He was tormented by guilt, by regret. He clutched the only reminder of a happy day, of the little girl she once was, and his heart gave out. The story explained everything. It gave his death meaning, and Mia's life a tragic role. She wasn't an abandoned child. She was the reason for his final pilgrimage. Mia picked up her phone, found the contact, Mom, and pressed call. The rings were long, monotonous. "Yes?" Irene's voice was dry, indifferent. "Mom, it's me." "I see that. Did something happen?" "No, I just wanted to ask something." A pause. "Ask away." Mia gripped the phone tighter. "Do you ever think that he might have been looking for me?" "Who?" "Dad." A long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then a short, sharp laugh. "Stop this nonsense, Amelia. That man didn't need us then, and he doesn't need us now. Forget him, just like I did." "But no buts. Stop living in the past. Get your life together. Find a decent job. Start a real life." The coldness and spite in her voice were like a physical blow. "I have to go. Bye." The line went dead. Mia lowered the phone. Her mother was just hurt. She couldn't understand her father's true motives. But Mia could. She believed. She needed proof. Not for herself, she already believed. For the world, for Helen, for the sheriff, for her mother. Mia remembered the online archive of the Lakeside Gazette, the local paper from her hometown. Access was a paid subscription, $20 a month, a significant sum. Mia opened her mobile banking app and looked at her balance. $450. Rent was due in a week. $300. That would leave $150. For food, for transportation. Her finger hovered over the pay button. A moment of doubt. Then, determination. She pressed it. A moment of doubt. Then, determination. She pressed the button. The transaction was confirmed. Balance, $425. This was her gamble, a leap of faith. Everything on one card, on one name. The night turned into a marathon. Mia sat on the sofa, hunched over her phone, the screen glowing brightly in the darkness. Her eyes ached. She opened the archive website, logged into her account, and went to the search section. She typed, Morgan. She hit search. The screen flickered, and a list of results loaded. 123 mentions. Mia started scrolling. Sports victories. Anthony Morgan took third place in the Classifieds. Garage for sale. Contact S.P. Morgan. Obituaries. Igor Morgan has passed away. Weddings. Divorces. Minor news. With every page, her confidence waned, fear replacing hope. What if she was wrong? What if this was all a figment of her sick imagination? Mia kept scrolling, her fingers growing numb, her eyes watering. The clock ticked. 2 in the morning. 3. Page 67. A small article in the Incidents section, dated 20 years ago. Accident on the outskirts of town. Mia stopped. Her heart skipped a beat. She read, Last night on the highway heading toward the county seat, a traffic accident occurred. 2 vehicles collided. There were no injuries. The parties involved, D.M. Morgan and P.L. Peterson. The cause was failure to maintain a safe distance. D.M. Morgan. Daniel M. Morgan. The initials matched. Mia reread it, again and again. Her hands were shaking. It was him. He was here, in Havenwood, 20 years ago. This wasn't a fantasy. This was documented proof. Mia took a screenshot, her fingers barely obeying her. A burst of euphoria so physical it was almost painful. She had found his trail. Mia leaned back on the sofa, the phone falling into her lap. Her breathing was rapid, her heart pounding. The obsession with the man from the diner faded into the background. This was now the story of her father, Daniel Morgan. Mia was no longer a victim of circumstances. She was an investigator on a trail. The goal was clear, concrete. Go to Havenwood, her childhood town. Find the answers there. A feverish, manic energy replaced her apathy. Her life had a purpose. Mia closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Even if this life was leading her into the unknown, even if it was built on scraps of memory and desperate hope, this was her life, her choice, her path, and she would follow it to the end. Mia woke up before her alarm. For the first time in years, she opened her eyes on her own, without the torturous process of dragging herself out of sleep, without the crushing weight on her chest. A feverish energy filled her body. She got up and dressed. Gray jeans, a black t-shirt, an old windbreaker. She looked at her phone. The screenshot of the accident report. The proof. Today, she was going to Havenwood. The diner greeted her with its usual noise. The smell of coffee, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the highway outside the windows. Helen was standing at the counter. She saw Mia and narrowed her eyes. Mia walked straight up to her, not breaking eye contact. I need a couple of days off. Personal reasons. Her voice was firm, unusually so. Helen leaned back, crossing her arms. A smirk played on her lips. Oh, we have personal reasons now? Mia didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead. Helen paused, then shrugged. Fine, your business. Just explain it to the manager yourself. I will. Mia turned and walked toward the exit. Helen's sarcasm was left far behind, insignificant, unimportant. She was already mentally buying a bus ticket, planning her route, preparing to meet her past. The bus left at 10 in the morning. Mia sat by the window, clutching her bag to her chest. Inside, her old phone held the proof. The doors hissed shut. The engine rumbled. The bus pulled away. Familiar landscapes drifted by. Gray buildings, the highway, fields, forests. Mia didn't look at them. She looked ahead, replaying the upcoming meetings, the conversations in her mind. She would go to the archives, show them the facts. They would confirm her theory. She was no longer invisible, no longer a function, no longer a machine. She was a daughter on her father's trail. This new role filled her with an intoxicating sense of her own importance. For the first time in her life, she existed not for someone else, but for herself. Havenwood greeted her with a raw, damp wind. Mia stepped off the bus at the station. The cold air hit her face, carrying the smell of wet earth and rust. The euphoria of the trip began to evaporate. The town seemed smaller, older, more hostile. She walked down familiar streets, cracked pavement, peeling facades, empty storefronts. The skeleton of a shuttered clock factory loomed over the horizon, a black silhouette, a dead monument. The familiar places didn't evoke nostalgia, only anxiety. Mia quickened her pace, heading toward the center, toward the town hall. The ghost town was sucking the energy out of her, replacing it with a cold, sticky uncertainty. The town hall greeted her with echoing corridors, the smell of bureaucracy, old paint, and dust. A sign on the wall, "Archives to basement." Mia descended the creaky steps. A door at the end of the hall. She pushed it open and stepped inside. A realm of dust and silence. Shelves reached to the ceiling, filled with folders, boxes, and gray cardboard spines. At a desk sat a woman in her 60s, glasses on her nose, gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Mrs. Gable, the archivist. She looked up, peering at Mia over her glasses without interest. "Can I help you?" Mia approached, placing her phone on the desk and showing the screenshot. "I need information about the man in this article, Daniel M. Morgan. The accident was 20 years ago." Her voice trembled slightly. Mrs. Gable picked up the phone, squinted, and read for a long moment. She handed it back. "Wait here." She stood up and disappeared between the shelves, into the depths of the archive. Mia was left alone, standing in the middle of the room, clutching her phone. The minutes dragged on. Mrs. Gable returned with a thin, yellowed folder. She placed it on the desk and opened it. "Morgan, Daniel M. Here it is. There's nothing else." Mia moved closer, her hands shaking. Inside were a few sheets of paper, a dry accident report, an address at the old mill housing, the name of the other driver. The cause, failure to maintain distance. No other leads. Mia flipped through the pages, searching for anything, a detail, a hint. Nothing. She looked up at Mrs. Gable, her expression pleading. "Is there anything else? Where he lived? Where he worked?" Mrs. Gable shrugged, glancing at a ledger. "Ah, here's something else." Her finger slid down the lines. "He died about 15 years ago. Cirrhosis of the liver. A county burial." The word "died" exploded in her mind. Silence. Deafening. 15 years ago. The man from the diner couldn't have been her father. Her theory collapsed. It had been beautiful, elegant, desired. And it fell apart in an instant, burying Mia under the rubble. The memories were lies. The coincidences were random. The hope was an illusion. Mia stood there, staring blankly at the folder. The life was draining out of her, along with her hope. She walked out of the archives, and the bright daylight blinded her. She stopped on the steps, squinting. The town lay before her, desolate and cold. She began to walk aimlessly, with no destination in mind. There was her old school, its walls peeling, its windows broken. There was the building where she used to live, a gray block with a shabby entrance. These places had once been filled with meaning. Now they were just empty sets. She was an idiot who had built a castle in the air, one that had crumbled with a single word. The trip, the money, the emotions, all for nothing. Mia felt hollowed out, stripped bare, ridiculously pathetic. The bus station. The last bus was at 7. Mia walked through the dark streets as dusk settled, the streetlights flickering dimly. An alley, foul-smelling, dark. A shortcut to the station. She turned into it. The trip, the expenses, the emotions. It was all for nothing. Mia felt hollowed out, stripped bare, ridiculously pathetic. The bus station. The last bus was at 7. Mia walked through the dark streets as dusk settled, the streetlights flickering dimly. An alley, foul-smelling, dark. A shortcut to the station. She turned into it. In the middle of the alley, a figure swayed. A man. Mia tried to walk around him, but he stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His face was swollen and reddish, his eyes cloudy. He reeked of cheap liquor and an unwashed body. His hand shot out, grabbing the sleeve of her jacket. "Got any money, beautiful?" His voice was hoarse, aggressive. Mia tried to pull away, but he held on tighter. "I said give me some money." All of her internal hell erupted. The disappointment, the shame, the anger at herself. This man had become the physical embodiment of the world's ugliness, a world that had just trampled her dream. A scream tore from her throat, not of fear, but of pure rage. She shoved him with both hands, with all her might. The drunkard staggered back, hitting the wall. Mia didn't wait to see what happened. She turned and ran. She tore through the dark streets, not caring where she was going. Her lungs burned. Tears streamed down her cheeks, tears of humiliation, of powerlessness. She was running from the town, from the man, from herself, from the fool she had been just hours before. The bus, the night road. Mia sat by the window, staring at her reflection in the black glass. Her face looked worn, empty. She felt nothing, only a void. She had no purpose, no money, no story. She was simply returning to her cage. But now she knew. Outside its bars there was nothing but disappointment. She had lost to herself, to her own foolish hope. This journey hadn't uncovered the truth. It had stolen her last illusion. The Crossroads Diner. Morning. Mia walked in and stopped at the threshold. A new girl was behind the counter, young, with blonde hair and a crisp white blouse. In Mia's spot. Helen saw her and walked over. There was no gloating in her eyes, just a weary statement of fact. "The owner stopped by. He wanted me to tell you. Go to accounting to get your final check." A pause. "Your time off is permanent now. Sorry." The word fired didn't bring tears or anger, just a dull numbness. Mia stood in the middle of the familiar room, now alien. She looked at Helen, at the new girl, at the tables she had wiped 1,000 times. In one day she had lost everything. Her fabricated story, her hope, her job, her only reality. She had hit rock bottom, a deep, dark, sticky bottom from which there was no climbing back up. It was late evening, and the Crossroads Diner was submerged in silence, broken only by the hum of refrigerators. A single dim lamp above the counter cast a weak glow. Mia stood in the middle of the room, a cardboard box on a table. She was packing her things. A pair of work shoes, an old sweater, a few books she'd never read. Every movement was slow, as if underwater. She had lost. Her absurd rebellion against a gray reality had ended in collapse. She was ready to return to her apartment, to her apathy, but now she didn't even have the illusion of stability. A ghost evicted from her own haunted house. Mia placed the last item in the box, closed the lid, and stopped. Her gaze fell on the table by the window. His table. Her feet moved on their own, unconsciously, like a sleepwalker's. She didn't know why she was going there, to touch the beginning of her madness one last time. From her apron pocket, she pulled out a damp cloth. The apron was still on, dark blue, with the diner's logo. This gesture was her only prayer in 10 years. She began to wipe the tabletop, already perfectly clean and cold. Mechanically, slowly. She wasn't saying goodbye to the place, but to the role she had played there. Her hand slid across the table and brushed against the metal napkin holder. Her fingers felt an anomaly, something dense, foreign, wedged inside. Mia stopped, peering into the narrow gap. There, pressed against the back wall, was the corner of a yellowed envelope. It had been there all this time, in plain sight, hidden by the daily hustle, waiting for someone who wouldn't just look, but see. Mia pulled out the envelope. It was thin, fragile. No name, no address. She looked at it without emotion, just another strange item left by a customer. She no longer believed in anything. With a dull, detached curiosity, Mia opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of notepad paper covered in a hurried, trembling hand. Mia began to read. The world stood still. Helen. The first word struck her like an electric shock. I sat here for 4 hours looking at you. You're all grown up. I wanted to see my daughter one last time. I'm sorry I never came over. Your father. Mia reread it, again and again. Each word was a nail, pinning her to this moment. The shock was so intense her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't her story. It had never been her story. Her whole tragedy, her reclaimed past, her theory, it all belonged to Helen. Mia sank into a chair, clutching the letter to her chest. There was no disappointment, no resentment, only a deafening clarity. Her hunt for a ghost had forced her to learn how to look, to notice, to feel. These new, painful skills had found their true purpose. The old Mia would have thrown the letter away. The new Mia understood. She was holding not just a note, but someone else's fate. Her personal mission had failed, but from its ruins, another, more important one had risen. Mia stood up, her movements collected, purposeful. She placed the box of her belongings on the floor. Helen was still here. Mia knew it. After her shift, Helen always went out to the back alley to smoke a cigarette, to release the day's frustrations with the smoke. Mia walked decisively toward the service exit. She pushed the door open. The raw, damp night air greeted her. The back alley. Helen stood with her back to the door, shivering in the cold. The glowing tip of her cigarette was the only warm point in the gray space. She heard footsteps but didn't turn around. What, you came to gloat? Her voice was tired, bitter. She was expecting reproaches, ridicule, anything that fit her view of the world. Mia remained silent. She walked closer and simply held out the unfolded letter. Helen looked from Mia to the letter in confusion. She took it, her fingers lightly brushing against Mia's. Her eyes scanned the lines. A second of confusion. Her face turned to stone. "Dad?" It wasn't a question. A soundless whisper. An exhale. She looked up at Mia, her eyes filled with a wild, primal horror. In an instant, Helen's armor, the sarcasm, the cynicism, the feigned indifference, crumbled away. She stared at the letter, then out into the darkness, toward the spot where the car had once been. The realization hit her like an avalanche. He was here. He was watching her. And all the while, she was complaining about customers, teasing Mia. 4 hours, 4 cups of coffee. He had sat there, silent, watching, and then he died. Her legs gave out. Helen slid down the cold brick wall, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with dry, silent sobs. Mia didn't leave. She didn't pat her on the shoulder or offer words of comfort. She just stood there beside her. Her presence was an anchor in the storm of grief. She watched the broken, weeping Helen, and for the first time in her life, she felt someone else's pain as sharply as her own. She had become a witness, not to her own fabricated tragedy, but to a real one. In this silent companionship, she found her true purpose. Time passed. Helen's sobs subsided, replaced by quiet whimpers. She looked up, her face swollen and lost. What do I do now?" It was a whisper, the voice of a lost child. Mia looked past her, toward the dark windows of the kitchen. The coffee pot was on the counter. She knew it was. She took a step toward the door. For a start, her voice was quiet but firm. "Let me make us some coffee." They went inside. Mia flipped on the lights, bright and harsh after the darkness. She walked to the counter and picked up the coffee pot. Helen stood in the middle of the room, the letter in her hand, crumpled and damp with tears. She looked at Mia as if she were something incomprehensible. "Why did you—" Her voice broke. "Why didn't you just leave?" Mia poured water into the coffee maker, her movements slow and deliberate. "I don't know. It was the truth." She really didn't understand. The old Mia would have left, hidden in her apartment, shut herself away from someone else's pain. But the new Mia had stayed. The coffee began to brew, its aroma filling the room. Mia took out 2 cups and set them on the counter. Helen came over and sat on a high stool, placing the letter in front of her. "He sat right here." Her fingers traced the paper. "He watched me. And I didn't even notice." Mia poured the coffee and set a cup in front of Helen. "I didn't notice either." Helen looked at her. "But you were looking." "I was looking for the wrong thing." Silence. Helen picked up her cup, wrapping both hands around it for warmth. "A cherry-red sedan," she said quietly. "He had a cherry-red sedan, I remember. He used to take me for rides in it." Mia nodded, sitting on the adjacent stool. "I thought it was my car, my story, and it turned out to be mine." A pause. "I'm sorry." Helen let out a bitter laugh. "For what? You found his letter. I never would have." They sat in silence, drinking their coffee, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock filling the space. Helen stared into her cup. "You know, I hated him my whole life. For leaving, for abandoning us. I thought he didn't care." Her voice was broken. "And then he came here. He sat right here, watched me, and died." Tears streamed down her cheeks again. Mia silently handed her a napkin. Helen took it and wiped her face. "I don't even know what's worse. That he didn't love me, or that he did, but never said a word. Mia finished her coffee and set the cup down. He did say something, just in a different way. She pointed to the letter. Helen looked at it, reading it again. I'm sorry I never came over. Her voice trembled. Idiot. Coward. But there was no anger in her voice, only pain. Mia stood up, went to the sink and washed her cup. The familiar motion was calming. Helen watched her back. Mia? Mia turned around. Thank you. The word sounded strange, unnatural, coming from Helen. Mia nodded and dried her hands on a towel. I should go. Where? Home. Helen glanced at the box of belongings by the door. What about your job? I was fired, remember? Yeah. Helen looked down. I'm sorry. It wasn't your fault. I could have stood up for you. Mia shrugged. It was my own fault. I disappeared for 2 days. I was acting strange. A heavy silence fell between them. Helen clutched the letter in her hand. Stay. Mia stopped. What? Stay. I'll talk to the owner. I'll explain the situation. Helen, please. It was a word Helen never used. Mia looked at her, at the crumpled letter, at her swollen eyes. Okay. They walked out to the parking lot together. The cold night air, the distant hum of the highway. Helen lit a cigarette, her hands shaking. You know, she began quietly, I always thought that if he ever came back, I'd tell him everything. How much I hated him, how long I waited, how I burned all his pictures. She took a deep drag. And now he's dead. And I didn't say anything. Mia stood beside her, silent. But he left the letter, Helen continued. That means he wanted me to know, that he came, that he was watching me. Another drag. That means something, right? Yes. The single word was firm, solid. Helen nodded. She finished her cigarette, dropped it, and crushed it with her foot. Let's go. It's cold. They went back inside the diner. Mia picked up her box of things. Leave it here, Helen said. You can bring your stuff back tomorrow. Mia set the box down. Helen turned off the lights and locked the door. They stepped outside and went their separate ways. Mia walked home, crossing the pedestrian bridge over the highway. The metal structure hummed beneath her feet. She stopped in the middle, looking down at the endless ribbon of the road. Headlights, trucks, cars, everything in constant motion. Mia was moving too. She hadn't found her father. She had lost her job and spent her last dollars. But she had found something else. A connection. With Helen. With reality. Her apartment greeted her with silence. Mia undressed and lay down on her bed. She closed her eyes. The shoebox was under the bed, the drawing still inside. Tomorrow she would give it to Helen. It was her story, not Mia's. But Mia had helped her find it, and that had changed everything. She fell asleep without anxiety, for the first time in a long, long time. In the morning, Mia woke early, got dressed, and took the box with the drawing. She walked to the diner. Helen was already there, getting ready to open. She saw Mia and smiled, a faint but genuine smile. Hey. Hey. Mia held out the box. This is yours. Helen opened it and saw the drawing. Where did you get this? I found it in the car. I thought it had to do with my father. I was wrong. Helen unfolded the drawing. The house, the sun, the two figures. Below, the word Daddy. Her fingers trembled. I drew this about 20 years ago. I gave it to him for his birthday. Her voice was quiet. He kept it. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time she was smiling. Thank you, Mia. Mia nodded. Did the owner agree? Yeah, he said you can come back. On probation. Okay. Helen placed the drawing back in the box carefully. Let's get to work. The day started as usual. The noise, the customers, the orders. But something had changed. Mia wiped tables, and Helen took orders. Sometimes their eyes would meet, a brief nod, an understanding. They were no longer just co-workers. They were witnesses to each other's pain, and that bound them more tightly than any words could. That evening, Mia was wiping the table by the window. His table. She paused and looked out. The parking lot was empty. The cherry-red sedan was long gone, but a trace of it remained. In the letter, in the drawing, in their memories. The man hadn't come for Mia. He had come for Helen. But he had changed them both. Mia continued to work, slowly, calmly. Her life had returned to its routine, but now the routine had meaning. A small, quiet meaning. But it was real.